Rob and I'm back with another Pokemon Duel video. Today we're continuing the buff series on Pokemon Duel, and we're going to be looking at one that's been requested. I've had so many of you saying, you need to buff, you need to look at this one. This is the worst EX figure in all of Pokemon Duel. And I still kind of think that Chestnut is, but I think that might be for a little bit of personal reasons. So I'm going to have a look at this one for you all. A lot of you have said that this is the worst Pokemon in Pokemon Duel for an EX figure, and it is Dialga. Alright, so here it is, Dialga, the number 1 entry in the Pokemon Duel library. It is a pretty impressive figure, I've got to say. Now, it looks really cool, it's in the design, I should say. So, the actual ability, well, we'll have a look at that in a moment. But the design of this figure, I think it looks really, really nice. I love the lightning that's coming down on it. It is a legendary figure. It's a beautiful Pokemon. But let's go and have a look at its starter disc. And this is very, very similar to the reason I had a problem with Chestnut in the last video that I did. It only has 2 attacks, which means it's incredibly weak to status effects. If, for instance, this figure gets paralyzed, it loses more than half of its wheel, becomes a miss, basically. So that is a real bad thing. Let's have a look at its attacks, though. So Roar of Time is actually a really good attack. It hits for 140, which it's not quite top tier, but it's still decent. And it has a cool ability. Return the battle opponent to their start of duel state, excluding evolution. And then it has a 100 Dragon Claw, which is not that great in these days, to be honest. Its ability here, if there are no other Pokemon on your bench, this Pokemon cannot enter the field using an MP move. This Pokemon is not knocked out in battle. If it would be, it moves to the bench instead. So it's got 2 parts to this ability. The first one is obviously a big drawback, that you can't put it onto the field using an MP move if there's another figure on your bench. I remember the first time I got Dialga out of a booster, I was so excited to get to run it. I literally looked at my team, and that was definitely the strongest figure that I had at the time. So I was super keen to get out there and start playing that figure. And when I got into a match and I tried to use the figure, I was just so frustrated. Like, I kept clicking on it and didn't know what was going on because I couldn't even play it. I was obviously pretty hopeless at Pokemon Duel back then. Some would say I still am, but I would say that I have improved quite a bit since then, at least. But it was just frustrating to see that I had a figure that I really wanted to use, and it just had that stupid drawback that you can't put it onto the field. And back then it kind of made sense because it wasn't the strongest figure. I mean, it was one of the strongest figures out there, but now it really isn't. It's nowhere near it, and it really shouldn't have that ability anymore. Now, it's been pointed out to me that this can be a real bad thing if, for instance, you just had a figure knocked out and it's in your PC and it has wiped. You can't actually bring Dialga onto the field then. You've got 2 figures on the bench and you can't bring anything onto the field. That's a pretty bad situation to be in. And even just at the start of the game, Dialga's stuck on your bench for quite a while until you can actually get everything else off the bench first. For a figure that doesn't really have huge attack, it doesn't really have anything really solid, that is a massive drawback. So I can see why you all want this figure to be buffed. It does need a buff, 100%. Whether it is the worst figure for an EX in the game, that is debatable, but I can see the points behind it. Now, it does have another benefit in its typing though. It is a steel type figure, which means that it does have one of the best Z moves in the game, because it's one of those where you can attack and then move your figure. So the Psychic lets you move 3 steps after you attack, the Steel lets you move 2. So you can potentially save the game, jump onto goal by using that ability. It is a really, I think it's probably the 3rd best Z move in the game. One more positive before we look at how we're going to buff it is the fact that it does have 2 attacks, or 2 white attacks only, can be a benefit at times. If you combine Dialga with an X speed, it gets nearly half the wheel becoming gold, or potentially more than half the wheel, depending on how you level that up. So that is a really positive thing that Dialga can do. But that brings me to the point about changing this ability. What do we need to do? What can we do to make this figure actually useful? And I think the first thing is we need to change that ability. We need to remove the part about not entering the field using an MP move. That is just useless. There are figures out there that have better stats than this that don't have any limitations whatsoever. So we'll change that. I think the fact that it has the ability to not be knocked out in battle is something that's reasonable. I think we can keep that in. We don't have to buff the attacks. It can be slightly less powerful than some of the other EXs out there, but having that ability not to get knocked out, I think, is something that kind of balances that out. So we'll keep that in there. We'll also add a 4-piece dodge segment so that when it is paralyzed or burned, it's not losing half its will. And I think that pretty much does it. The only other thing that I did think would be interesting was Roar of Time. I think if we change that so that it does actually return evolutions back to the start of dual state, that would be interesting as well. I don't know if that's going a little too far. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it as well. But those are the 3 suggestions that I have. Fixing that ability so that you can get it out onto the field at any time. Changing the wheel so it has a 4-segment dodge. And potentially also allowing Roar of Time to remove evolutions. I think that would be really interesting. So those are my thoughts on Dialga. Is it the worst EX in the game? Let me know what you think. Do you think that that buff will do the job? Would you use that figure if we change it to that? Let me know in the comments below. That's going to do it for this video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and I'll catch you in the next video. This is Rocket Rob blasting off again!